Well, the participatory planning procedure is, I mean, it can become very involved discussing sort of some important aspects of it, but it's actually rather remarkably simple in its basic structure. And this is the procedure, that there is an agency, which I know the anarchists are worried it'll be the Central Planning Board in disguise, but it has no discretionary power whatsoever. There's an agency that we have named, unfortunately, the Iteration Facilitation Board, which somebody needs a better name for that. And it announces what we call preliminary initial estimates of the opportunity costs of using resources, and the social costs of producing different goods and services. So it makes an announcement of sort of estimates. In reality, those estimates would be somewhat, they would be small revisions from last year's plan, what was left over from last year's plan. In any case, they announced these preliminary estimates of opportunity costs and social costs, and all the councils are asked to look at that and submit a proposal for what they want to do. So if you're a workers' council, you look at that, say, well, they're telling us that you know the estimate of the benefit of a unit of this good that we might produce is such and such. And they're telling us if we want to use this resource, well, the social cost of that is such and such. Looking at all that, looking at what we are thinking we want to do, we are going to submit a proposal saying, this is what we want to, these are the goods we want to produce, and to do this, we are asking permission to use these following inputs. That's what every workers' council does. Every neighborhood consumption council submits a consumption request. And it says, here are the individual these are the consumption requests coming from individual families for individual things. We have now added on to that what we want is our neighborhood consumption, neighborhood public goods, and this is our initial consumption request. Now the Consumption Council has to provide one more piece of information. The Workers' Council just says these are all the inputs we want, and if you let us have those, these are the inputs we are committing the outputs that we're committing to produce and provide. The Neighborhood Consumption Council says, these are all the things we want to consume, and this is the average effort rating of the residents in our Neighborhood Consumption Council. So those proposals come back in. And what will happen is it won't be a feasible plan. There will be discrepancies between how much of different things are demanded and how much of different things are available in supply. And so what would happen is, well, if you actually said, okay, you said what you want to do, let's all go do it, what you would discover is by January 15th, people would not be able to do what they just proposed because to do it, they were needing things and it didn't come. So that's what it means. A plan is not feasible if you have not finally got to the point where there's going to be, when everything that somebody thinks they're going to get, they're actually going to get and be able to therefore do what they said they were going to do. So first we have the initial sort of estimates that people have when they look. Then we have this initial round of proposals comes in. The Iteration Facilitation Board just adds up all these proposals and it calculates excess demand or excess supply for all the goods that are being produced, all the services that are being produced, and all of the sort of natural resources and categories of labor. And it calculates excess supply and excess demand. And most of the things are going to be in excess demand, in initial rounds. There's going to be requests for more than there is supply of. And the Iteration Facilitation Board just adjusts their estimate of social costs and opportunity costs. If there's a lot of excess demand, then they adjust their estimate up. If there's something that's in excess supply, they say, well, wait a minute. It turns out that this actually isn't as scarce as we thought it was, and therefore the opportunity cost of using it isn't as high as it was, and they adjust it down. So they adjust the estimates, and they send these estimates back out to the councils and say, look, we now need you to look at these and repropose. And that's the process. It's basically a process where, and you look at these and notice you repropose what you want to do. It's not like a central planning authority said, oh, we got your proposal, but these proposals they don't add up to a feasible plan. So now we're sending you back a revision. The revision is done by the workers' councils themselves in the second round and the third round and whatever many rounds there have to be until you actually have reached. Now what we've demonstrated is under the usual assumptions about technologies and preferences, if you adjust these estimates in this way, that eventually after enough rounds of this revision, and these are self-revisions of self-activity proposals. I think that's the key thing for people to keep their mind on when they're thinking about what's the essential nature of what's going on here, that you will arrive at a feasible plan. The only other thing that is involved is there's two criteria for whether or not the final thing is acceptable. One criteria is it feasible? And that's what the adjustment of the prices and the reproposals achieve. The other criteria is, well, has everybody agreed that everybody's proposal is socially responsible? And what happens every round is when the consumer councils put in their proposal, they also put in their average effort rating. And if their average effort rating is low compared to the social cost of their consumption request, then other councils have the opportunity in every round to say, wait a minute, that's not really socially responsible. Basically, you're being too greedy. You're asking for consumption that is demonstrably in excess of the sacrifices that you people made when you were working. And we don't have to agree to that because it's not fair to the rest of us. So every council basically, it's easy to calculate the social cost of consumption requests to see how much above or below the average it is. It's easy to compare that to the effort rating for the members of the council on average. Is theirs below our average? So it's easy for everybody to see, is the proposal fair or not? And everybody gets a right to say, I vote thumbs up or I vote thumbs down. On the worker council proposal, it's actually even easier. That every one of their proposals can be evaluated. We can take the current estimates of the social benefits of all their outputs, multiply them what they say they're going to do, and we get your proposal would provide this much social benefits. We can look at all the inputs that they are requesting to use, and we can calculate using the opportunity costs and the social costs of those intermediate goods. We can calculate those inputs. What's the cost to society if we let you use them? Your outputs, the services and goods you're saying that you will provide, what's the social benefit to society, the rest of us, if you go ahead and do that? Well, if the social benefits are greater than the social costs, then the rest of us are better off if we say, yes, go ahead and do that. Be our guest. You proposed it, you must like it, and the rest of us are going to be better off if you do it. Thumbs up. So we call that the social benefit to social cost ratio. And as long as a proposal from a workers' council has a social benefit to social cost ratio that's 1 or above, there is absolutely no reason not for everybody else to say, yes, we approve it, it's clearly socially responsible, it's in our interest for you to go ahead and do that. Only when they're not, if a workers' council persists in making proposals and revising proposals where the social benefits are smaller than the social costs, the proposal will probably continue to get voted down. And what that basically means is that workers' council is not going to be allowed to do what it's proposing to do. What would happen in the end is if they can't submit a proposal that finally meets with people's approval, then they don't get the inputs that they're requesting because everybody has said, for whatever reason, that's not an efficient use of those resources. There are other workers' councils that have made proposals that are to the benefit of the rest of us, and you haven't. So no, these are our resources, not just yours. You don't get them. then in the end that council would be disbanded, and those people working there would have to go work someplace else. But that's essentially the nature of the planning procedure. That's how it works. There's a lot that can be talked about in terms of, how long would it take, how cumbersome it is. Notice that there are no meetings where delegates from all these workers' councils and consumer councils. This is democratic planning, but it's not democratic planning of, we've got, the workers' councils, they each send a representative to a meeting that comes up with a plan. That is not what this process is like at all. And I would argue that conception of democratic planning is truly naive and would not work for a whole bunch of reasons. That's not what's going on here. There are meetings, but the meetings take place inside every worker council and inside every neighborhood council, because they have to meet to decide what to propose, and they have to presumably meet to decide how to revise proposals. And they have to meet, I suppose, to decide whether to vote thumbs up or thumbs down on everybody else. But it's not like we have, it's not like every workers' council is sending people, to a meeting that's doing this planning for the national economy. This is not a proposal that bears any resemblance of that, what I think is actually the most common assumption people make when they think, you want to actually make a whole national economic plan through sort of democratically. They think of a big meeting followed by a big vote, and that's not what's going on here at all. And I actually personally believe that if one tried to do it that way, you would very quickly discover just how badly how politically unfeasible that turns out to be.